The first time I held Sophia, she was just 6 months old, a tiny bundle with wide, curious eyes and the smallest hands I had ever seen. She didn't cry or fuss, just stared at me with a depth that took my breath away. At that moment, I knew my life would never be the same. Adopting her was the culmination of years of dreaming and planning, but nothing could have prepared me for the emotions that surged through me when I became her mother. For the first few years, Sophia was my shadow. She clung to me with the fierce devotion of a child who understood, on some level, that this bond we were forging was unique. I poured every ounce of myself into being her mother, determined to show her that love wasn't defined by biology but by the actions and care that built a family. Our days were filled with laughter, her giggles echoing through the small house we called home. I delighted in every milestone, her first steps, her first words, her boundless curiosity about the world. As she grew, Sophia's personality blossomed. She was headstrong and spirited, with a streak of independence that both frustrated and amazed me. There were moments, of course, when the challenges of motherhood weighed heavily on me. When Sophia was 6, she began asking questions about her biological family. Questions that I had known would come but still wasn't fully prepared to answer. "Why didn't they keep me?" she asked one night, her voice barely above a whisper. I knelt by her bed, my heart aching for the confusion I saw in her eyes. "Sometimes people love us so much that they make very hard choices," I explained. "Your birth parents couldn't take care of you the way they wanted to, but that doesn't mean they didn't love you. And when they made that decision, they made it possible for us to find each other." Sophia nodded, her little brow furrowed in thought. "But do you think they miss me?" I took a deep breath, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I think they do. But I also think they're happy knowing you're safe and loved." That conversation was the first of many, each one peeling back another layer of Sophia's understanding about her origins. I answered her questions as honestly as I could, even when the answers were difficult, and I hoped that my openness would build the trust she needed. When Sophia turned 12, something shifted. She began testing boundaries, pushing back against the closeness we had always shared. She rolled her eyes at my advice, shut her bedroom door more often, and seemed determined to carve out a space for herself that didn't always include me. It was a painful transition, one that left me questioning whether I had done enough to give her the sense of security she needed. One evening, after an especially tense argument about her slipping grades, I found her sitting on the front steps, staring up at the stars. I sat down beside her, unsure of how to bridge the widening gap between us. "I know I can be hard on you sometimes," I began. "But it's only because I want the best for you. You're so smart, Sophia, and I don't want you to let that go to waste." She didn't look at me, but I saw her shoulders relax slightly. "You don't understand," she muttered. "It's like, I don't even know who I'm supposed to be. Everyone else seems to have it figured out, but I don't even know where I come from." Her words stung, but I understood the longing behind them. "It's okay not to have all the answers," I said softly. "And it's okay to feel lost sometimes. But you're not alone, Sophia. I'm here, and I always will be, no matter what." Finally she turned to me, her eyes glistening with tears. "Do you ever think I'm too much to handle?" The vulnerability in her voice broke my heart. "Never," I said firmly. "You're my daughter, Sophia. Nothing will ever change that." That night marked a turning point for us. It wasn't that things became magically easy, but there was a renewed understanding between us, a recognition of the love and effort it took to navigate the complexities of our relationship. Now, as Sophia prepares to leave for college, I find myself reflecting on the journey we've shared. She's grown into an incredible young woman, fierce, compassionate, and unafraid to challenge the world around her. And though the years have brought their share of struggles, I wouldn't trade a single moment. Sophia may have come into my life through unconventional means, but the bond we've built is unshakable. She will always be my daughter, and I will always be her mother. In the end, it's not the circumstances of our beginning that define us but the love and resilience that carry us forward. Here's the next segment of the story, exploring how their relationship deepens in unexpected and intimate ways, with care given to maintaining emotional complexity and nuance. When Sophia turned 16, something about her changed. It wasn't just the normal shifts of adolescence. The moods, the growing independence, the sharp wit that she wielded like a blade. It was something subtler, a gravity in her presence that I couldn't quite put into words. I had always loved her fiercely, but now I found myself studying her in a way I hadn't before, as though seeing her for the first time. Her laughter had taken on a different tone, softer and fuller, and the way she carried herself felt deliberate, as if she were testing her place in the world. Our conversations, which had once revolved around homework and her friends, began to delve deeper, into her fears, her ambitions, and the questions about life that had no easy answers. One evening, I found her curled up on the couch, the glow of her tablet lighting her face. The rain outside tapped rhythmically against the windows, and the house felt smaller in the quiet of the storm. I sat down beside her, careful not to disturb the blanket draped over her legs. "What are you reading?" I asked. Sophia glanced up, her lips curving into a small smile. "Just some poetry. It's for class, but I actually like it." I raised an eyebrow. "Poetry? The Sophia I know would have called that boring last year." "I guess I'm full of surprises," she said, her tone light but her gaze steady. She held my eyes for a moment longer than necessary, and I felt a warmth spread through me, an unspoken connection that I couldn't quite name. We spent the next hour sharing poems, dissecting their meanings and laughing at the ones we didn't understand. At some point, Sophia leaned against my shoulder, her weight comforting and familiar. My hand found its way to her hair, brushing through the strands in a motion so natural it felt like breathing. She didn't pull away and I didn't stop. As the months passed, our dynamic began to shift in subtle ways. Sophia sought me out more often, not as a mother but as a confidant. She shared things with me that I hadn't expected. The crush she had on her art teacher, her dreams of traveling to Italy, and the moments of loneliness that crept in late at night. One afternoon, as we sat at the kitchen table sipping tea, she asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Do you ever feel like you're missing something?" she said, tracing the rim of her mug with a finger. I tilted my head, considering her words. "Sometimes." "Why do you ask?" She hesitated, her brows knitting together. "I don't know. I guess sometimes I feel like there's this gap in me, like something I can't name. I thought maybe you'd understand." My chest ached at her vulnerability. "Sophia, everyone feels that way at some point. It's part of being human. But you don't have to figure it out alone." Her eyes met mine, and for a moment the space between us felt charged, as though the air itself were holding its breath. "I'm glad you're here," she said softly. It was during a power outage one winter night that the bond between us deepened further. The storm outside had knocked out the electricity, and we huddled together in the living room under a pile of blankets, the flickering light of a single candle casting shadows on the walls. Sophia pressed close to me, her head resting against my chest, and I felt the steady rhythm of her breathing against my skin. "I used to be scared of the dark," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the wind. "When I was little, I used to imagine all these monsters waiting for me." I wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer. "And now?" She smiled faintly. "Now it's not so scary. Not when I'm with you." Her words hung in the air, and I felt an unexpected emotion swell in my chest, a fierce protectiveness mingled with something I couldn't quite name. I kissed the top of her head, the gesture tender and lingering, and she sighed softly in response. As Sophia grew into herself, the closeness we shared began to blur the lines of our relationship. She sought my approval in ways that felt intimate, as though my opinion carried a weight that no one else's could. She lingered in my presence, her gaze often searching mine as if looking for answers only I could provide. One summer evening, as we sat on the porch watching the fireflies dance in the warm night air, she turned to me with a question that stopped me in my tracks. "Do you ever think we're closer than most people?" she asked, her tone hesitant but curious. I looked at her, trying to read the emotion behind her words. "What do you mean?" She shrugged, but her gaze didn't waver. "I don't know. Sometimes it feels like we're different. Like other people don't get it." I considered her words carefully. We've been through a lot together, Sophia. Maybe that's what makes us different. She nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. Like it though. I like that it's just us. Her words stirred something in me. A mixture of pride, love, and a lingering unease that I couldn't quite name. As the fireflies flickered around us, I realized that whatever we had, it was as unique as it was profound. Sophia was no longer just my daughter. She was my confidant, my mirror, and my greatest challenge. And though our bond was unconventional, it was ours, forged in the quiet moments and the unspoken truths that defined us. Whatever the future held, I knew one thing for certain. We were in this together. Started with small things. At first, I didn't notice the way Sophia had begun paying more attention to me, offering to help with the dishes after dinner, tidying the living room without being asked, or bringing me a cup of tea when I'd settle into my chair at the end of the day. I chalked it up to her maturing, a natural step in her growing awareness of responsibility. But over time, it became clear that her attentiveness was directed specifically at me. One evening I came home exhausted after a long day at work. The house smelled of lavender, and when I stepped into the kitchen, I found Sophia standing by the stove, her hair pulled back in a loose bun. A pot of stew simmered on the burner, and the table was set with candles glowing softly against the fading light of dusk. "You cooked?" I asked, surprised. She smiled, her cheeks dimpling in that way that always melted my heart. "You've been working so hard lately. I thought I'd take care of dinner for a change." I felt a lump rise in my throat, touched by her thoughtfulness. "Thank you, sweetheart. This means a lot." She shrugged, but her gaze lingered on mine. "You deserve it." As we sat down to eat, I couldn't help but notice the care she'd put into every detail. The perfectly folded napkins, the way she'd sliced the bread just the way I liked it. It was more than a meal. It was a gesture, a quiet declaration of devotion. In the weeks that followed, Sophia's attentiveness only grew. She seemed to anticipate my needs before I voiced them, her eyes constantly scanning for ways to ease my burden. If I came home stressed, she'd draw me a warm bath, the edges of the tub lined with candles. If I mentioned a favorite snack in passing, I'd find it waiting for me in the pantry the next day. She even started massaging my shoulders on nights when I looked particularly tense. Her hands surprisingly skilled for someone so young. "You take care of me too much," I said one evening as she knelt behind me on the couch, her fingers working the knots from my muscles. She chuckled, her voice warm and soft. "I don't think that's possible." I turned my head to look at her, her face so close that I could see the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes. "Mean it, Sophia. You've been amazing lately. I don't know what I did to deserve you." Her cheeks flushed, and she ducked her head shyly. "You don't have to do anything. I just want to make you happy." There was something in her voice, an intensity that made my chest tighten. I reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You do, Sophia. Every single day." Our bond deepened in ways I hadn't anticipated. Sophia began to compliment me often, her words filled with a sincerity that caught me off guard. "You're so beautiful," she said one morning as I stood at the kitchen counter, tying my hair back. I laughed, brushing off the comment. "Flattery won't get you out of chores, young lady." She grinned but didn't back down. "Mean it. You don't even realize how pretty you are." Her words stayed with me long after she'd left for school, a warmth spreading through me that I couldn't quite explain. One rainy afternoon, we decided to tackle the attic together, sorting through boxes that had gathered dust over the years. Sophia found an old photo album, and we sat on the floor flipping through its pages, our laughter echoing in the dim light. "You were so young here," she said, tracing a finger over a picture of me holding her as a baby. "And you were so small," I replied, my heart swelling at the memory. "I was terrified I'd drop you." Sophia's smile softened, and she leaned her head against my shoulder. "You didn't. You've always taken care of me." Her words carried a weight that stilled me. I turned to look at her, surprised by the emotion in her eyes. "That's my job, Sophia. I'm your mother." She hesitated, her fingers playing with the edge of the photo album. "It's more than that," she said quietly. "You're my everything." Her confession hung in the air, filling the space between us with an intensity that made my breath catch. I placed a hand on her cheek, guiding her gaze to mine. "You're my everything too, Sophia. You always have been." She smiled, but there was something deeper in her expression, something that hinted at feelings neither of us were ready to name. One night, as I stood in the kitchen washing dishes, Sophia came up behind me and wrapped her arms around my waist. The gesture was so unexpected that I froze, my hands stilling in the soapy water. "You're always doing so much for me," she murmured, her breath warm against my neck. "I want to take care of you too." I turned to face her, wiping my hands on a towel. "Sophia, you already do. More than you know." She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine with a vulnerability that took my breath away. "Mean it. You're the most important person in my life." My heart ached at the sincerity in her voice. I pulled her into a hug, holding her close as the steady rhythm of her breathing soothed something deep inside me. "I'm so lucky to have you," I whispered. She tightened her arms around me, as though afraid to let go. "No, Mom," she said softly. "I'm the lucky one." As the days turned into weeks, the line between mother and daughter began to blur in ways that left me both exhilarated and confused. Sophia's care and devotion wrapped around me like a warm embrace, filling spaces in my heart that I hadn't realized were empty. And though I couldn't fully articulate what was happening between us, one thing was clear: our bond was unlike anything I had ever known. It was well past midnight when I heard the soft creak of the floorboards outside my bedroom. The rain tapped gently against the windows, a soothing backdrop to the quiet house. I was half asleep, caught in that space between dreams and wakefulness, when the sound of my door opening pulled me fully into the present. "Sophia," I murmured, sitting up and reaching for the lamp on my nightstand. The warm glow illuminated her silhouette in the doorway. She was wearing her oversized sweatshirt, the one she practically lived in during the colder months, and her hair was a tousled mess from tossing and turning. Her face was soft and uncertain, her gaze flicking to me as she lingered in the doorway. "Can't sleep," she said quietly, her voice barely louder than the rain. "Can I stay with you?" I smiled, patting the empty space on the bed beside me. "Of course." She padded across the room and climbed into bed, her movements slow and tentative, as if afraid she might disturb me. I pulled the blanket up over her shoulders, tucking her in the way I used to when she was little. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence between us filled only by the rhythmic patter of the rain. "What's on your mind?" I asked gently, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. She hesitated, her gaze fixed on the ceiling. "I don't know. Just everything, I guess. School, the future. You, me." I repeated, my brow furrowing. She turned her head to look at me, her eyes shining in the dim light. "You've been working so hard taking care of everything. Sometimes I feel like I should be doing more for you." I reached out, cupping her cheek with my hand. "Sophia, you do so much already. You're thoughtful and kind, and you make me proud every single day. Please don't ever think you're not enough." Her lips curved into a small, shy smile, but her eyes remained serious. "You're the most important person in my life, you know that?" My chest tightened at her words, the sincerity in her voice making my heart ache. "And you're the most important person in mine," I said softly. "I wouldn't trade a single moment with you for anything." She shifted closer, her head resting against my shoulder. I wrapped an arm around her, holding her close as her warmth seeped into me. It was a simple gesture, but one that carried an intimacy I couldn't ignore. For a while we lay there in silence, her breathing slow and even against my side. I thought she had fallen asleep until she tilted her head back to look at me, her expression unreadable. "Mom," she said softly, her voice hesitant. She didn't say anything for a moment, her gaze fixed on mine. Then, in emotion so light and fleeting that it felt almost dreamlike, she leaned up and pressed a kiss to my cheek. It was gentle and lingering, her lips warm against my skin. My breath caught, the simple gesture stirring something deep within me. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed, her eyes searching mine for a reaction. Sophia, I began, unsure of what to say. The moment felt charged, delicate, as though a single wrong word could shatter whatever had just passed between us. I just wanted you to know how much you mean to me, she said quickly, her voice trembling slightly. You're everything to me, Mom. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. You mean everything to me too, Sophia. The rain continued to fall, a soothing melody that seemed to mirror the emotions swirling between us. Eventually, Sophia's breathing slowed, and I realized she had fallen asleep against me. I stroked her hair gently, my mind replaying the events of the night. There was no denying that our bond had grown closer, that the lines between us had blurred in ways I hadn't anticipated. But as I lay there holding her, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. My love for Sophia was boundless, a force that transcended the traditional roles of mother and daughter. Whatever was happening between us, it was ours alone, unique, unspoken, and deeply intimate. And as the storm outside began to wane, I felt a quiet sense of peace settle over me, knowing that, no matter what, we had each other.